He did not want a body. That is where this begins. Not with a war, not with a throne, not with the shimmering towers of an empire that once stretched to every horizon of the known world. It begins with a spirit, something without weight or hunger or the particular ache of memory, drifting through a place where everything was alive and warm and without border. And then a voice, a woman's voice, careful and full of something that sounded like love even then. I need your wisdom to hold back the ones who will go too far. Come, join me. He hesitated. Wisdom hesitates. That is what it is for. But she asked him to come. So he came. Take a slow breath. Whatever is waiting for you tomorrow, it is not here. You are somewhere else tonight, somewhere older than any map that has ever been drawn. We have the whole night, and the story I am going to tell you is the kind that takes its time. By the end of it, something in the way you understand regret, what it looks like when a person builds something for love and watches that same thing destroy the person they built it for, will be different than it was when you started. There is something sitting at the center of this story that I want to hold until we have earned it. A single lore fact confirmed by the canon of Dragon Age. The Veilguard, that changes what every warm moment in the first part of this story actually meant. When it arrives, you will feel the ground shift under a world you thought you understood. But first, before the wound, before the veil. There is a thing that Solas says once in Dragon Age, Inquisition, when someone asks him about the ancient elves. He says this: imagine instead spires of crystal twining through the branches, palaces floating among the clouds. Imagine beings who lived forever, for whom magic was as natural as breathing. That is what was lost. He says it quietly. He always says things quietly. And because the player does not yet know who he is, does not yet know that he is describing a world he himself once inhabited, one he built and watched collapse, and has spent thousands of years trying to find his way back to, it lands as melancholy. A scholar mourning something beautiful. It is only later that you realize he was not describing history. He was describing home. Elvhenan. The word means place of our people in the old tongue. And it was once exactly that, an empire that stretched across every land that would later be called Thedas, a civilization of crystal cities threaded through ancient forests, of towers that caught the light at angles that do not exist in any human architecture because they were not built by hands reaching upward. They were built by minds that moved freely through the fade, that dreaming world layered behind and beneath the waking one, and shaped matter the way a river shapes stone. Naturally, inevitably, without effort. The ancient elves, the elven, were not immortal in the way of legend. They could be killed, could be felled by sickness or injury. But they did not age. Not a single year did they carry on their faces or their bodies after the moment of their making. 1,000 years old and unchanged. 2,000. And their connection to the fade, to that warm other world of spirits and memory and living dream, ran so deep that it was not even magic to them in the way we mean the word. It was simply part of being elven, the way breathing is part of being alive. The fade moved through them, and they moved through it. And the whole of their civilization was built on that current. Their great library, the Vir Dirthara, existed in both worlds at once. Their towers floated because the fade held them. Their healers and their scholars and their dreamers walked back and forth across a border that did not yet exist. This was Elvhenan at its height, a world where magic was the air, and immortality was simply the default state of being elven, and the ancient city of Arlathan, greatest of all their cities, rose through crystal spires and palace clouds above the forest floor like something out of a dream that had simply decided to stay. It was very beautiful. It was also already rotting, deep beneath the surface, in ways that would take centuries more to become visible. But we will get to that. The most stunning revelation confirmed by Dragon Age. The Veilguard is this: the Elven did not emerge from the earth. They did not grow or evolve or spring forth from some divine act of creation in the way of myths. The first elves, the Evanuris, who would become gods, who were already becoming gods, were spirits, beings of pure thought and purpose and presence, native to the Fade, who looked at the physical world and decided they wanted to inhabit it. And they did something extraordinary and terrible to make it possible. Lyrium, that luminous, thrumming substance that every mage in Thedas treats with respect bordering on reverence, lyrium is blood. The blood of the Titans, the colossal ancient beings who were among the oldest things in the world. Vast, dreaming intelligences locked in stone beneath the earth. The primordial spirits who would become the first elves harvested that lyrium, that living blood, and used it to build themselves bodies, to cross out of the Fade and into flesh. The Titans noticed. Of course the Titans noticed. And so the elves, barely born as a physical people, barely settled into the weight and warmth of having bodies, found themselves at war with beings so enormous and so powerful that the conflict would shake the very bones of the world. The Evanuris, these former spirits who had made themselves into something new, something physical and brilliant and increasingly arrogant, became generals of this war. War is what makes gods out of generals. The elven people looked at these extraordinary beings and saw power and immortality and fire, and called them creators and protectors and, finally, gods, and believed what they saw. There is a detail, buried here in this origin, that the Dalish clans who survived the fall of Elvhenan and scattered across the world would never know. The tattoos on their faces, the Valaslin, the intricate sacred marks they wore as devotion to their gods, were not devotional at all. In the time of ancient Arlathan, the Valaslin were slave brands. Each pattern designated which god owned the elf who wore it. Every Dalish keeper who has ever raised her face to the sky and felt the marks on her cheek as a prayer has been praying in the language of chains. Solas knew this. He has always known this. And when you learn it, the quiet devastation behind his silences begins to take a different shape. But the war with the Titans first. Because the Titans cannot be left burning. Before any of this, before the Empire rose, before the war, before the gods became what they became, there was Mythal, and a spirit who did not want to be anything other than what it was. Solas, confirmed by the Veilguard, was originally a spirit of wisdom. Not a metaphor for wisdom, not a mage who embodied wisdom, a spirit, in the full Dragon Age sense of that word. A being of the Fade, made of one concept, living in that dreaming world as simply and naturally as a flame lives in fire. He had no particular desire for a physical form. He had, in fact, something close to an objection to it. The use of lyrium to create a body seemed to him dangerous in ways he could articulate and others did not want to hear. But Mythal asked him to come. Mythal, who was herself a primordial spirit of benevolence, who had chosen a body, who was becoming something extraordinary among her people, who could see that the others around her were already tilting toward something she could not name, but recognized as excess, as hunger, as the particular corruption of power over others. Mithil looked at the spirit of wisdom drifting in the fade and said, "I need you. I need your wisdom to hold back the voices that will go too far." There is a line of dialogue from Cole, a spirit-adjacent companion in Dragon Age, Inquisition, who perceives emotional truth the way most beings perceive temperature, that lands softly in the middle of a much longer conversation. He says, almost to himself, he did not want a body, but she asked him to come. He left a scar when he burned her off his face. That last part, the scar, refers to the Valislin, the slave brand Mithil placed on him as was custom, and which Solas burned away. The fact that Cole notices the scar and not the brand tells you something about how Solas carries it. He came because she asked. He crossed out of the Fade, took on flesh, and became something new. Not just wisdom anymore, something more complicated. He became her closest companion, her protector, eventually called Fen Amelin, Wolf Guardian, in the old language. He became, in the fullness of the word, her friend. What the spirit of wisdom wanted was exactly what wisdom always wants: to give, not to command, to help people see more clearly and then step back. He loved the Fade. He loved dreaming and moving and the clean, unguarded quality of thought unencumbered by a body. But Mithil had asked, and wisdom had come. This is the opening image of everything that follows. A spirit that did not want to be here, choosing to be here for love of a specific person, and building things for her, with her, because she asked. Hold this image. We will need it later. The Titans were ancient and enormous, and their connection to the Fade ran through the very stone of the world. When the first elves, the soon-to-be Evanuris, the former spirits who had made themselves physical with lyrium drawn from Titan bodies, went to war, it was a conflict between kinds of being that should not have been in conflict at all. The elves were losing. This is the part that matters for what comes. Next, the war went on, and the Evanuris and the people who followed them were losing it, and the prospect of defeat was existential, not just political or territorial, but civilizational. The Titans were too vast, too deep, too old. Their connection to the stone was the stone. Mithil came to Solas. She asked him to build something. A dagger, forged of pure lyrium, shaped with a specific purpose. She had a plan to end the war, and the plan required a weapon unlike any that existed. Solas raised his objection. He said, in the way that wisdom always raises objections, that what they were about to do was awful, that severing the Titans from their dreams would drive those dreams mad, that the cost of this particular victory would be paid by something that could not speak to protest it. Mithil said it was the only way. He built the dagger. The ritual they performed with it sundered the Titans from the Fade, cut the dreaming intelligence free of the vast stone bodies that housed. It rendered the Titans tranquil in the Dragon Age sense of that word, which is a way of saying emptied, passive, present but no longer there in the way that matters. It was effective. It ended the war. And what happened to those severed Titan dreams, those enormous fragments of awareness, cut loose and alone, spinning in the Fade with nowhere to go and no anchor to hold them, was something that Solas and Mithil could not fully foresee and could not take back. The severed dreams mutated. They became something new, something terrible, born from pain and disorientation, and a rage that had no target and no voice. The severed dreams of the Titans became the taint, the blight. Everything in Dragon Age that is called dark spawn corruption. The spreading sickness, the deepest roads, the archdemon dreams that drive the underground hordes, traces back to this moment. To a weapon that Solas built with his own hands, for Mythal, because she asked and because the war needed ending, and because there was no better way. He created the Blight, not as a weapon, not with cruelty, as a mercy in a war that was going to be lost otherwise. That is the kind of thing this story is full of. Good choices and terrible outcomes, hands that built only what was asked, and the long afterward of carrying what those hands made. What he built to end the war is still inside Thedas right now. You know it by a different name, and it is the most destructive force in the world. The war was won. The Titans were tranquil, the elves were victorious, and the Evanuris, who had led the war, who had become gods in the eyes of their people through it, stood at the peak of their power, the rightful leaders of a civilization that now encompassed all of Thedas. They had promised to step down after the war. That is what Elvhenan, the general who had led them, had told the people. This authority is temporary, necessary, a thing of wartime. When the war ends, so does the elevated command. The war ended. Elvhenan did not step down. None of them stepped down. And so the rot that had been germinating beneath the beauty of Elvhenan finally broke the surface. The Evanuris, 8 beings of extraordinary power who had once been spirits, who had won a war, who were worshipped as gods by every living elf, turned the fullness of that power not toward the protection of their people, but toward the maintenance of their own supremacy. They consolidated. They commanded. They divided the elven people among themselves, each god claiming followers. And they marked those followers with the Valasleen, the slave brands, the intricate patterns on the skin that said, "You belong to me." They discovered the Blight, the corrupted Titan dreams, still loose and churning in the Fade, and weaponized it. Not just in war against the Forgotten Ones, the opposing faction of ancient elven warlords, but against one another, against their own people, as an instrument of power and terror. One of the Evanuris, Andrul, found armor imbued with the taint, and used its power to terrorize the others until Mythal stopped her. The Blight, which had been born from a merciful act of war ending, was now a tool of oppression. Solas watched this happen. He had been Mythal's guardian, her protector, the wolf at her side. He believed in the elven people with the particular intensity of someone who had given up everything he was to serve them. And what he saw in the centuries after the war was an empire that had been saved becoming a prison. He rebelled. The name they gave him, Fenharel, the Dread Wolf, was an insult. The other Evanuris spat it at him. A wolf that turns on its own pack. An outcast, a trickster. He took the name as a badge of honor. From his lighthouse in the space between worlds, using the network of Illuvian mirrors to travel anywhere in Elvhenan, Solas led a rebellion, freeing slaves, removing brands, building sanctuaries for those who wished to leave. He fought for centuries. He was trying to make the Evanuris reconsider, trying to give the elven people the chance to choose something other than servitude, trying to be the voice that Mythal had originally called him into the world to be. But the Evanuris grew more desperate. His rebellion made them reach for darker tools. They weaponized the Blight more aggressively. They turned it on his people, on the spirits who were his kindred, on anyone who stood with the wolf. And then Solas told Mythal what he knew. He told her what the others were doing with the Blight, its scope, its danger, the ways it was warping the world and would continue to warp it if unchecked. He asked her to join him, to abandon the others, abandon the centuries of loyalty that had kept her standing beside gods she knew were flawed, and come to his side. She would not. She said she could stop them through diplomacy. She said she would investigate and intervene. She said she needed to handle this her way, through the old channels of authority, through the alliances she had maintained with careful patience for 1,000 years. He let her try. She went to confront them. What happens next is confirmed by the lore of Dragon Age, the Veilguard, and it is the moment this entire story has been building toward without announcing it. Mythal went to the other Evanuris to confront them about their abuse of the Blight. She believed she could reason with them. She had reasoned with Elvhenan before, had pulled him back from the edge before, had been the voice of restraint among them for centuries. The other elven gods murdered Mythal. They used a dagger to do it. Solas's lyrium dagger. The weapon he had forged with his own hands, at her request, to end the Titan War. The dagger that had birthed the Blight. The Evanuris had somehow acquired it, taken it from him, perhaps during the chaos of the rebellion, perhaps through treachery. And when Mythal came to them with her arguments and her authority and her belief that they could still be reached, they used his dagger to kill her. The weapon he built for her became the instrument of her death. Sit with that for a moment. He had warned Mythal that what they were doing in the Titan War was awful. He had built the dagger anyway because she asked. He had watched the blight that the dagger created become a tool of oppression. He had tried for centuries to build something better than what the Empire had become. And then Mythal, his oldest friend, the reason he had a body at all, went alone to speak to the people who wanted to destroy everything they had both tried to protect. They killed her with what he had made. This is what Dragon Age, the Veilguard, confirms in the memories recovered through the regrets of the Dread Wolf questline. A series of ancient visions locked in wolf statuettes, scattered through the crossroads, waiting for someone to find them and understand. The lore that was always there, hidden in the places only patience could reach. And when you find it, every moment of warmth between Solas and Mythal, every memory of her asking him to trust her, every scene of him at her side, every image of the two of them trying to build something worth having, is haunted by the object he made for her. The dagger was always already there, in every one of those moments. The instrument of her death, not yet used, existing in the space between them. Not a villain, a grieving craftsman, not an act of cruelty, a mercy that became something unendurable. Solas recovered the dagger from Elvhenan. He extracted from it, somehow, in the way that powerful things retain the imprint of what they have touched, a fragment of Mythal's spirit, preserved within the blade, a last piece of her. And then he did the only thing left to do. The place is called Skyhold now. It sits in the mountains as a fortress, cold and high, and bearing the weight of centuries of other people's stories. But its original name, in the ancient tongue, is Tarasil-an-Telas, the place where the sky was held back. This is where the veil was created. This is where Solas stood, alone, with a lyrium dagger in his hand and the life force of the Evanuris connected to its blade, and did something that had never been done and should never have been possible. The veil was not supposed to be what it became. That is what makes it tragic in a way that defeat alone never is. Solas was not trying to reshape the world. He was trying to build a prison. The Evanuris had murdered Mythal, had weaponized the Blight, had turned an immortal empire of extraordinary beauty into a hierarchical nightmare of slavery and terror. They needed to be contained. They could not easily be killed. Their power was too vast, their existence too entangled with the world. But they could be imprisoned, locked in the Fade, sustained against the death of the body by the very life force of their blood. connected to the dagger they had used to commit their greatest crime. The ritual went wrong. In the memories that Rook and the Veilguard witness, in those vivid shards of ancient experience locked in wolf statuettes through the crossroads, you can see the moment it happens. Solas performing the rite, intending to seal the Evanuris in the Fade and use their life force to sustain the prison. And then something going wrong. A scream of pain, something unexpected. The Fade, which was not supposed to be separated from the waking world, which was only supposed to lose the Evanuris, being locked away together with them inside that elven palace that would later be called the Black City. A curtain fell between all living things and the source of their power. The veil was an accident. Or not entirely an accident. The imprisonment was intentional, and the Evanuris are indeed locked within it. But the scale of what the veil became, the way it severed not just the gods, but every living elf from the Fade that had sustained their civilization, that was not the plan. It was the consequence. The unintended collateral devastation of a desperate act of grief and fury, and what passed for justice in a world without any better option. The magic required to create and sustain the veil was so vast that Solas, having spent it, simply stopped. He did not sleep. He called it something other than Uthenera, the elven word for the long, intentional sleep of the ancient elves, because this was not a choice. He simply ran out of everything he had. He lay down in the dark and was gone for millennia. And while he was gone, everything else happened. The elves, once the veil fell, began to age. Not immediately. The change was not a single terrible morning where everyone woke old. It was a slow thing, a quickening, a gradual discovery that something essential had been removed from the world and from themselves. The floating cities fell. The crystalline towers came down because the Fade had held them, and the Fade was gone. The great library, the Vir Dirthra, was destroyed because it had existed in both worlds at once, and now there was only one. Every marvel of Elvhenan that had been built on the presence of the Fade simply ceased to work. The empire did not fall to conquest. It fell because its foundations had been removed. And then conquest came, too. The Tevinter Imperium. Humans who had learned magic from the elves themselves, quicklings who moved fast through their short lives in ways the immortal elves had once found almost pitiable, rose and spread and made war on an elven people who were, by then, mortal and diminished and stripped of the connection to the Fade that had made them extraordinary. The great city of Arlathan was buried underground with blood magic, swallowed by the earth. The surviving elves were enslaved. For centuries, for generations. Long enough that the elves forgot most of their language. Long enough that the names of their gods became half myths and the truth of their history became folk tale. Long enough that the Dalish, those who escaped and became the wandering clans that carry fragments of the old culture forward, began to wear the slave brands on their faces and call them prayers. Solas woke up around the year 940 Dragon. Our time. The contemporary time of Dragon Age. Inquisition. He was weak. He had been gone so long that most of his power had faded with his body's long dormancy. He came back into the world like a stranger to it, moving through the Fade in dreams, looking for what remained. And what he found, what the spirit of wisdom found, wearing a borrowed face and a wanderer's clothes and the name Solas, which simply means pride in the old language, an irony he chose with full awareness, was this: elves wearing his empire's slave marks as holy devotion. Elves who had forgotten every true word of their language and stitched together a patchwork dialect from fragments. Elves who told stories about Fenharl, the dread wolf, as the great traitor, the one who had betrayed both the gods and the Forgotten Ones, trapping everyone, ruining everything. Elves who had no idea what they had been. He had created the Blight. He had built the weapon that killed Mythal. He had raised the Veil and stolen immortality from every living elf. And his people were wearing the brands of the masters he had freed them from and thanking their gods for the gift. He, as confirmed in Dragon Age, Trespasser, said this to the Inquisitor. Quietly, with the particular stillness of someone who has been carrying something for a very long time. It was not the arrival of humans that caused us to begin aging. It was me. The Veil took everything from the elves, even themselves. There is a choice at the end of Dragon Age. The Veilguard that carries the weight of everything above it. If you complete the regrets of the Dread Wolf, if you find every fragment, witness every memory, earn the trust of what remains of Mythal, she appears to Solas at the end. The fragment of her that had been locked in the lyrium dagger, that had persisted for millennia inside the blade that killed her, that Rook had carried across the entire game. Mythal speaks to him. She says, "I pulled you from the Fade you loved and sent you into war. I used your wisdom as a weapon, and it broke you." She tells him they should both bear the burdens of what they did together, and she releases him from her service, from the binding that had held him since the beginning, since the day a spirit of wisdom heard a voice he trusted and chose to take on a body he had not wanted. In the best ending of the Veilguard, Solas chooses to bind himself to the Veil, not to destroy it, not to tear it down and let the raw chaos of the Fade flood back into a world that has been living without it for thousands of years, but to keep it standing and to tend it, the way a passer, lighthouse keeper, tends a light. Imprisoned in the Fade, yes, but not fleeing, not abandoning, staying. What he was never able to give Mythal in life, his full presence, his willingness to stay when he wanted to run, to remain when the cost of remaining was unbearable. He gives her, at the end, to the world she asked him to help protect. The spirit of wisdom, who did not want a body, who came into the world because she asked, who built something that killed her and built something else that broke everything, choosing finally to stay. Not because it is pleasant, not because it resolves the grief, but because the alternative is worse. And because wisdom, when it survives everything that has been done to it, does not abandon the thing it was asked to protect. A spirit drifts in a dreaming place where everything is warm and alive. A voice. She needs his wisdom. Come, join me. He hesitates. Wisdom hesitates. That is what it is for. And then he goes. He takes on a body. He builds what she asks. He builds the dagger, and the blight, and the veil, and he carries what those hands made across millennia he never agreed to inhabit, looking for a way back to the beginning. The same spirit, at the end, standing in a world where elves wear slave marks as prayers and call them devotion, carrying a dagger that killed the only person who asked him here. The opening image and the closing image are the same, but what is between them has changed everything about what they mean. The things we build for love become the things we carry in grief. And sometimes, if we carry them long enough and honestly enough, we find not resolution, not absolution, but something quieter. The ability to stay. That is what Solas learned. That is what 10,000 years of consequence finally forced a spirit of wisdom to understand. That wisdom is not the absence of regret. It is what you do with it afterward. It is choosing to tend the thing you broke rather than flee from. What breaking it cost you. If this story stays with you, if some piece of it is still moving in you as you drift toward sleep, then consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like if it helped you find something worth staying awake for. The Fade is still out there, just beyond the waking. The crystal towers are still somewhere in the deep of the earth. Sleep well.